So my learning theory or paradigm was on constructivism, and this was initially based on the work and studies of Piaget and Vygotsky, and then it was continued by many others, including biologists and cognitive scientists who were studying the same ideas in education and about learning. So again, the main two theories behind my learning paradigm or my learning theory were Piaget and Vygotsky. Piaget's early studies were in biology. He devoted a lot of his life to studying cognitive behavior, and he often believed that humans were under construction or that they were constantly changing as they learn new things. Many of his studies have impacted education, and many of the underlying themes in education are based on his different studies. Many of the things we roll out as best practice can be rooted back to Piaget's work. Vygotsky focused more on the zone of proximal development. He also repeated a lot of Piaget's different studies in looking at where students should be challenged when looking at that zone of proximal development. What should we be focusing on with them? What are they able to be pushed on to learn more of? What do we need to continue focusing on with them? So this theory is focused on how people gain their knowledge or understanding, and it has found that knowledge and understanding are better gained and provide more meaning if they can be related to our own experiences. So learners is an active participant in their own learning, not just a passive learner sitting there listening, then they're more likely to remember the information, to truly retain what they're being taught. So having some of that exploration in their learning, not just sitting there listening to a lecture for 40 minutes of class time. This theory also looked at the mental construction that goes on as individuals are learning, and it is really looking at the fact that constructivism is based on the idea that learning is the result of mental construction, that new information fits better when it's paired with previous or existing memory. So connecting the students' learning to something they're already familiar with or something they can find value with in the real world setting. What it looks like in the classroom, again, I really like that quote from one of the resources that constructivism taps into and triggers the students' innate curiosity about the world and how things work. And that really ties into the idea behind this learning theory that we need to be giving students real world problems in class and real world situations and applying that learning that they're doing to these real world problems to engage their learning, to help them understand why they need to know this information. It also requires more discussions from the students on what they have done or what they've learned, not just listening. It also builds that new understanding based on what they already know or what they're already familiar with. And we do know that some of our students in classrooms don't have the same real world experiences as their peers. However, we can find ways to provide some of these experiences, whether it is through virtual field trips, through YouTube videos to help them understand what's going on, maybe in a math problem, letting students share some of those real world experiences they've had, which again is working on that social emotional piece where they have to talk to their peers, they have to explain their reasoning. And again, it really is just focusing on that active learning versus that passive learning that goes on in classrooms. So the learning is active if the students are involved in their own learning versus the teacher just telling them what they want them to know in that passive learning. So it really is looking at a shift from the teacher presenting all the information to the student learning that information, maybe through discovery or through problem solving. And it really puts that teacher more at a mentor or coach role versus being a lecturer in class the whole time. And it makes the students more of those active participants because they're not just sitting there waiting for the information to be given to them. It really does let the students take more ownership of what they're learning or what they have learned. It allows the teachers to talk with the students rather than talking at them the entire time and building some of that dialogue and that even relationship between the teacher and student to learn together. And again, it just promotes that social and emotional skills as they not only collaborate with their peers to solve some of these different problems, but also with collaborating with teachers in the classroom as the teacher is not so much the leader anymore, but more of a guide during instruction. So my examples for in the classroom really focus on math just because that is my background. But as I was studying this, I really feel like there's things we're already doing in math that meet this particular learning theory. And one of the big ones for math would be 3-act math tasks, where the students are watching quick video clips and then they have to decide what kind of problems they can solve from these real world events and then working through those without having really a set structure from the teacher, but rather just a guide they follow to go through this process. Same with real world math problems, giving them problems that the students can relate to, using the students' names in word problems, using real life events that the students can then start to answer that question that we constantly hear in math of when they're ever going to need that or when they're ever going to really use that information. So they can make that connection. If we can get them engaged with what's happening in that word problem, they're more likely to work through and persevere in solving that word problem. And then finally, doing some project based learning or the application of skills whenever they're learning new concepts in math. So if you're teaching the students about ratios, rates, things like that, maybe they set up a project based learning activity where they then apply those to a road trip that they're planning. So again, they're not told specifically where they have to go, different things they have to complete. It's more of a very open set of directions, and the students really have to do the exploration and the learning and apply those skills they've learned again to something real life, something that would make sense to them, that they would see the value in that skill or concept. So that's an overview of the learning theory or paradigm of constructivism. And again, here are some of my resources from that I pulled some of my information from. But again, I feel like this is something we see very much in education, just as it's stated in the fourth slide, that we're really going into schools and we're using this as we push out these new reforms or best practices in the classroom.